excitement and clamorous worldly care. How sweet thy shores reach, and find no welcome there. And when comes on the season of peace, goodwill, 'tis then I love thee best of all, beloved of my heart enshrines thee
Let us pray. Almighty God, who hast given us this good land for our heritage, we humbly beseech thee to bless us with honorable industry, sound learning, and pure manners. Save us from violence, discord, and confusion, from pride and arrogance and every evil way. Defend our liberties, preserve our unity, endure with the spirit of wisdom and fortitude all those to whom is entrusted the authority of government, and grant that there may be justice and peace at home, and obedience to thy laws among the nations of the earth, to thy honor and glory, who livest and reignest, God over all. Amen. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you now and always. Amen.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honorable House the Cabinet Office, Cayman Islands Government Annual Report for the 2018 financial year.
So ordered. Is the Premier intending to speak there at all?
No, Mr. Speaker, except to say that I am delighted that their financial statements are unqualified in every respect.
Cabinet Office, Cayman Islands Government, Cabinet Office Annual Report 2016-2017 financial year, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Premier.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the Cabinet Office, Cayman Islands Government, Cabinet Office Annual Report for the 2016-2017 financial year.
So ordered.
Oh, you know,
Is the minister speak? The premier
Mr. Speaker,
speaking?
only to say again that I am very pleased and proud that that is also an unqualified financial statement.
Portfolio of the Civil Service Annual Report 2016-2017 to be laid on the table by the Honourable Acting Deputy Governor.
Honorable the Acting Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the annual report for the portfolio of the Civil Service for the year ended 31st of December 2017.
So ordered. Is the member intending to speak there too?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I shall offer a brief explanation of the annual report and will then address the financial statements as of 31st December 2017. The annual report provides a comprehensive review of the work of the Management Support Unit, the Civil Service College, the Policy, Finance and Administration Unit, Strategic and Corporate HR, and all within the core portfolio of the Civil Service, along with all of our agencies, including the National Archives, the Commission Secretariat, the Elections Office, the Internal Audit Unit, the Office of Education Standards, the Strategic Reform Implementation Unit, the Legislative Assembly, the Office of the Deputy Governor, and the Office of His Excellency the Governor. In 2017, the portfolio of the Civil Service renewed its focus on public sector reform with its attempts to modernize HR policies and practices, all while developing the strategy behind the Civil Service 5-year strategic plan to support our vision of being a world-class civil service. Mr. Speaker, as the entity responsible for providing central HR support and strategies, the POCS continued to support civil servants through the following projects. By allowing Caymanians to work longer and accumulate savings towards their retirement, we implemented the amendments to the Public Service Management Law and the personnel regulations to facilitate an increase in the retirement age for civil servants. At the end of the 2016-17 period, there were 284 persons employed within the civil service who were over age 60. In fact, there were 2 who were over age 70, and the number is growing. We established the hiring practices policy in order to lessen the recruitment moratorium that was introduced in October 2018. This will realign the HR focus from one of strict budgetary compliance to one which emphasizes having the right people possessing the right skills and the right positions at the right time. In regards to improving our governance arrangements, the POCS delivered or supported the delivery of the following projects. We issued an updated officials travel policy in August 2016 to, among other areas, revise the travel rate sheet and incorporate a publication template for travel by senior officials. The new policy for offering or receiving hospitality, entertainment, or gifts was issued in June 2017. We issued a new anti-fraud policy, including a code of business conduct which addresses actions by civil servants to prevent, detect, and remediate fraud, corruption, and dishonesty in and outside of the workplace. In regards to the delivery of the first multi-year strategic plan for the civil service, a number of reform projects were progressed and milestones reached. Some of the key milestones include, Mr. Speaker, our ability to launch our training in customer service as well as leadership. So, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that we are very happy to have been able to progress our 5-year strategic plan, which also included procuring 30 Happy or Not devices, which were allowing us to assess customer service from the 10 key departments which have the highest traffic of visitors through them. And we are happy to report that we're having very high customer satisfaction rates across. The portfolio of the civil service also developed a new competency framework for civil servants, and this framework will continue to define and communicate to all civil servants the expected behaviors that must be demonstrated to support the vision of being a world-class civil service. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General issued an unqualified opinion on the financial position of the portfolio of the civil service as at 31st December 2017. The Auditor General has stated that the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the portfolio. My sincere appreciation and thanks go to the entire POCS team for another strong year and an exciting long-term outlook. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Cayman Islands Government Annual HR Report 2018 to be laid on the table by the Honourable Acting Deputy Governor.
The Honorable the Acting Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to lay on the table of this Honorable House the annual HR report for 2018 for the Cayman Islands Government.
So ordered. Is the member speaking?
No, Mr. Speaker. In the interest of time, I would just encourage members of this Honorable House and the public as well to read the annual report, which contains extensive information about the persons employed within our civil service and key HR trends. And I'm happy to report there are many positive developments which are contained in that report. Thank you, sir.
Cayman Islands National Insurance Company Annual Report 2016-2017 to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
The Honorable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the annual report of the Cayman Islands National Insurance Company, Cineco, for the period ended 31st of December 2017.
So ordered. Is the Honorable Minister speaking?
Very briefly, sir. Mr. Speaker, on 25th April 2019, the Auditor General issued an unqualified opinion on the financial statements of Cineco for the 18-month period. Mr. Speaker, the annual report contains a wealth of information on the activities, achievements, goals and objectives of Cineco for the period, and I commend the report to this Honourable House. Mr. Speaker, in the period, 18-month period ended 31st of December 2017, Cineco earned revenues of $104.4 million. Total underwriting expenses were $104.1 million, accounting for 95% of total expenses of $109.7 million, with administrative expenses and other expenses accounting for the balance of $5.6 million. Administrative expenses and other expenses comprised primarily of salaries and employee benefits, totaling $3.9 million. For the period ended December 31, 2017, Cineco recorded a net loss of $5.3 million compared to the prior 12-month net loss of $4.5 million. The better than budgeted net loss of $8.6 million was due primarily to a reduction in third-party administration fees, lower reinsurance rates, and conducting the medical management and claims processes functions in-house. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government, I express our gratitude to the staff and management of Cineco, the Board of Directors, and the Board of Directors for their assistance and the good work that they are doing to provide healthcare insurance for all of our civil service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Financial statements of Cayman Islands National Insurance Company Limited, 30th of June 2016, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
The Honorable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the audited financial statements of the Cayman Islands National Insurance Company, Cineco, for the year ended June 30th, 2016.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking?
Mr. Speaker, just to mention that the Auditor General also issued her unqualified opinion on these financial statements on the 25th of April 2019, and I commend them to this Honourable House. Thank you, sir.
Government of the Cayman Islands, Minister of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, annual financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2013, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands.
Honorable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, and Mr. Speaker, in total, there are 4 financial statements. I would beg if I could lay them collectively. If the clerk could read them, then I could lay them one time.
Government of the Cayman Islands, Ministry of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, annual financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2014. Government of the Cayman Islands, Ministry of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, annual financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2015. Ministry of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, Cayman Islands Government, annual report 2015-2016 financial year, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to lay the following annual financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2015-16.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Questions, Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet?
None.
Statements by Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
I have received some statement. The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am to advise this Legislative Assembly that this morning the Cabinet of the Cayman Islands approved the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport and the Port Authority proceeding with the cruise berthing and enhanced cargo facility project on the basis of a bid by Verdant Isle Port Partners as accepted by the Central Tenders Committee on Tuesday, 23rd of July, 2019. Verdant Isle Port Partners consists of McAlpine Cayman Limited, Orion Marine Construction, Carnival Corporation, and Royal Caribbean Cruises Limited. Orion Marine Construction has purchased Meisner Marine, which previously built the Royal Watler Terminal as well as the Creek Dock in Cayman Brac. Notwithstanding this morning's approval, the government will not proceed to execute a contract before the 1st of October 2019 in order to allow for the completion of the people-initiated petition verification of signature process. Details relating to the bid and the cruise berthing project generally, which could not be disclosed until the completion of the tender process and selection of a preferred bidder, will be discussed at a press conference to be held at 1 p.m. Monday, 29th of July, at the GIS Studio, second floor of the Government Administration Building.
The Honorable Leader of the Opposition, you have questions?
Mr. Speaker, I beg your indulgence in accordance with Standing Order 32 that I ask a few questions. Mr. Speaker? Short? I know. You can say anything you want, short or long. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Premier can explain how the advent of the procurement law coming into place a year ago, how we are using Central Tenders Committee in this bid.
Mr. Chairman,
Premier.
sorry, Mr. Speaker, I go to too many meetings, I can't remember who's who. Mr. Speaker, the legal advice, which was quite careful, is that projects which were commenced prior to the start, the coming into effect of the procurement law, are governed by the Central Tenders Committee process. And this project, Mr. Speaker, started this year, I think is 7 years ago, and has gone through now 3 administrations to get to this point. So for the purposes of this bid, the Central Tenders Committee was constituted of the current membership of the Procurement Committee, so it is the same individuals, albeit under a different title, if I may put it that way.
The Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Premier can tell us, if such is the case, where is the criteria in law for the Central Tenders Committee with the advent of the Procurement Committee having superseded those?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I am entirely unqualified to speak to such matters. If the Honorable Leader of the Opposition has an issue with that, I suggest that he raise it with the Honorable Attorney General, and I don't mean at this moment, I mean in writing, or have his lawyers do so.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would respectfully ask then that since the Attorney General is present, that he may explain such to this Honorable House and this country at large.
Thank you, Mr.
The
Speaker.
Honorable Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be more than honored to do so in writing at the request of the honorable member once I have the chance to consider.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker. No. Don't tell me it's off the top of his head. Mr. Speaker, the government, and in particular the Premier, cannot come to this Honorable House and say that in accordance with a particular process, they have made decisions to put this country into expense, and no one then can explain where it comes from and what criteria was used. But Mr. Speaker, it is this morning he says, this morning the Cabinet of the Cayman Islands approved the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport and the Port Authority proceeding with the cruise berthing and etc., under as accepted by the Central Tenders Committee. And now we're saying that you can't explain it. I would, Mr. Speaker, as far as I know, the procurement in this country is based now on a law, the procurement law, that supersedes a Central Tenders Committee criteria. Now I want to know where it is in law, policy, regulations, or otherwise, that the criteria for Central Tenders Committee for the purposes of procurement and tendering is laid out.
The Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I was careful to say to the member that there was very thoughtful legal advice in relation to this matter, and that the legal advice, which was not given to me because I have nothing to do with the procurement process, given to the government and the Central Tenders Committee, was that projects which began prior to the commencement of the procurement law are governed by the Central Tenders Committee because the projects are deemed to have been on the way before the procurement law came into effect. Now, the member is entitled to take a view or otherwise about that. That is the legal advice which the government had. That's the legal advice that the government followed. If the member disagrees with that, it is open to him to challenge it through some judicial review process or otherwise. But he can't expect me, as Premier who's not involved in the procurement process, to answer a technical legal question like that, notwithstanding the fact that I'm legally qualified. The Honorable Attorney General has undertaken to provide the answer to him in writing if that is what he wishes. The Honorable Attorney General is obviously saying, I am not going off the top of my head to try to explain this to you because it is a technical legal issue. Lawyers on both sides of this issue were careful to consider all of these things before a tender process was commenced and a bid or bids made. So the member is, if this were some sort of elementary issue, I could understand it. The member insisting that the Attorney General now recite chapter and verse for him. The Honorable Attorney General has undertaken to provide this. I don't know what earth-shattering consequence the member thinks is going to flow from him not knowing this information this evening.
The Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is earth-shattering to think that we have now determined that the word started is defined as from the time you started looking at a project. I don't know when I got my law degree, but you got one and you're not much better than me. No, not through osmosis, no. I hope that's not how you got yours. I don't pretend to be no lawyer. I'm asking you all who are the lawyers to explain it to this House and to this country how and where the CTC is still a statute committee. That's all I am asking on behalf of the people of this country, because the procurement law, section 21 says every procurement project being carried out that has not been started under this law comes into force shall be determined by a procurement project to be determined to be a procurement project under this law, and this law shall apply accordingly. Has not been started. Started in the ground, dug. The project is not started, it's still being procured. Oh yeah? Mr. Speaker, I want to know which law, where did the legal advice come from then?
The Honorable Premier, the member is...
Mr. Speaker, the member asked and answered his own question. I'm not sure what he's on about. The government has spent more than $10 million on this project over the last 7 years. The project has long since started.
Mr. Speaker, I asked a question. I wanted to know where the legal advice, as they say, came from. Who provided legal advice?
Mr. Speaker, the government's advisors with respect to this project is Appleby.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, may I just say, well, I would like to know who engaged them in the government. Mr. Speaker, the Premier say I would like to know, but that'll be as far as I'll get. This is the people's business. they need to respond.
What is the last question?
What department in government procured the legal Apple bid to be the legal advisors?
Mr. Speaker, the Major Projects Office.
The Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, is it usual that an office other than a board, that is, other can engage a law firm not through the Attorney General's office that is the legal advisor to government?
The Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, if the member will have regard to the public management and finance law, and in particular to the schedule thereto which deals with the framework for fiscal responsibility, he will see that the government is mandated to obtain independent legal and accounting advice with respect to what I shall collectively describe as major projects.
The Honorable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I totally agree with the Premier, but it is usual through the Attorney General's office.
Yes. I think we should move on to the next statement. I have received from the Honorable the Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will proceed with one of the two statements that I believe you.
So, are you making two statements, Honorable Minister? One.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my office had.
Okay. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a statement about the efforts which are being made by the government, specifically through the work of the Ministry of Financial Services and relevant departments thereunder, to address international assessments of our financial services industry. In particular, I want to apprise members of this Honourable House on the latest development with regards to Cayman's economic substance regime. Members will recall that in December 2018, the Legislative Assembly, after extensive stakeholder consultation, passed the International Tax Cooperation Economic Substance Law 2018. Subsequently, regulations and guidance to support the primary law were also published. Mr. Speaker, this legislative framework was delivered in response to the EU's economic substance concerns, as well as the international standard for the substantial activities requirements for no or nominal tax jurisdictions as set by the OECD's Forum on Harmful Tax Practices. Mr. Speaker, in June 2019, a ministry delegation attended a meeting of the Forum on Harmful Tax Practices, where Cayman's legislative framework for economic substance, along with the framework of the other no or nominal tax jurisdictions, was reviewed. Mr. Speaker, on the 23rd July 2019, the OECD Inclusive Framework on BEPS published the results of the Forum on Harmful Tax Practices peer reviews. The Cayman Islands Legislative Framework for Economic Substance was judged to be in line with the standard and therefore not harmful. Mr. Speaker, this is a positive outcome. In terms of next steps, from 2020, the OECD's Forum on Harmful Tax Practices will start an annual monitoring process for the effectiveness of jurisdictions' mechanisms to ensure compliance with the standards in practice. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, we will continue the good work being done on our economic substance regime. Our goal is not only to be ready for next year's review and for any additional assessments thereafter, but to further enhance the reputation of the Cayman Islands as a leading international financial center. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll proceed to the next statement. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a statement about the efforts which are being made by the government to better protect the creative works of our people and to attract foreign business that relies on numerous safeguards in their creations in the Cayman Islands and around the globe. As this Honourable House is aware, the Cayman Islands is one of the world's leading jurisdictions for financial services. Over the years, we have developed a reputation as a developed and robust international financial center that caters to all types of business. Time has also brought a number of technological advances that have altered global finance and the financial services industry as a whole, which includes intellectual property. Mr. Speaker, technology has created a greater focus on intellectual property rights, such as the ability to make a living producing online videos, crafting distinct branding for products, or designing goods in unique ways. In today's global economy, the preservation of creations is critical, and IP rights are some of the most important assets of any business. Mr. Speaker, as an international financial center, the Cayman Islands recognize the important role IP rights have in the reputation of this jurisdiction. Government is committed to a legislative framework that not only acknowledges and allows for economic use of those rights, but which incorporates effective enforcement measures. Mr. Speaker, for example, a revised 2016 copyright law allows the latest documentary films to be screened, bought, and sold here with enhanced legal recourse against piracy. It also covers new types of work, such as podcasts, audiobooks, and music streaming services that are commonplace in today's smartphone environment. Mr. Speaker, also brand owners can sell their merchandise and retail goods in the Cayman Islands, knowing our revamped trademarks law can address any instances of counterfeit goods. This law, which has allowed for direct registration of trademarks in the Cayman Islands since 2017, is not only on par with worldwide trademark practice, but also empowers our justice system to carry out enforcement measures. Mr. Speaker, our ability to enforce IP rights has not gone unnoticed by our trade partners. In fact, the strength of our IP regime, which has been modernized over the last decade and offers a full suite of IP rights protection, was an important factor in determining the Cayman Islands' suitability to host the latest edition of its regional IP enforcement training conference. Mr. Speaker, this training conference is taking place as we speak. The U.S. government usually conducts regional IP training in developing countries in Africa, Eastern Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia. This training is provided to law enforcement, customs officials, prosecutors, regulatory officials, and judges charged with enforcing IP crime in their respective jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, leading this week's training on Grand Cayman, which started on Tuesday and concludes today, are U.S. government officials from the Department of State, Homeland Security, Customs and Border Control, Department of Justice, and the Patent and Trademark Office, and the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center. Mr. Speaker, law enforcement agencies participating in this week's training here in the Cayman Islands includes representatives from the Cayman Islands, the Dominican Republic, Honduras, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Panama, St. Lucia, Anguilla, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, and Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, this week's training focuses on investigations and enforcement operations specifically concerning counterfeit goods and their connection to transnational organized crime. Law enforcement in the Cayman Islands plays an important role in this work, collaborating with regional and international authorities to tackle investigations concerning pressing issues like piracy and counterfeiting of goods, which often span multiple jurisdictions and involve increasingly sophisticated criminals. At this juncture, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to point out that the coordination between the U.S. government officials and the local authorities for the conference was handled by the Cayman Islands Intellectual Property Office. Homeland Security specifically coordinated the agenda through our office, which is Cayman's National IP Authority, that is the Cayman Islands Intellectual Property Office. Established in May 2016, the office falls under the remit of the Ministry of Financial Services and has accomplished much, and their stellar work has accelerated our status within the IP world. In fact, it should be noted that the Cayman Islands is a member of the Leadership Committee with the International Trademark Association. This association is one of the world's top IP advocacy groups, representing some 7,000 organizations in 190 countries. For the Cayman Islands to be invited into a leadership role truly speaks volumes for this jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, all of these facts point to our neighbors having a greater appreciation of our IP regime and our ability to advance the global push to address IP-related crime cross borders. The discussion here on enforcement matters related to topical issues such as piracy and counterfeit goods will help not only our practices, but the enforcement measures taken by the entire region. We also believe the training will encourage the governments represented here to continue working with their domestic IP practitioners, as we have done, to achieve partnerships that protect against instances of abuse and fraudulent activity and improve their overall enforcement efforts. While this week's conference marches on, Mr. Speaker, we have already garnered praise for our IP regime. The U.S. Patent and Trademarks Office, for example, spoke glowingly about the legislation here and the breadth of protection available in the Cayman Islands for IP rights holders. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, as I was sitting here, I received an update from the Chief Officer that specifically indicated that the team from the U.S. were extremely impressed and were full of praise for our local team. Discussions on other joint activities have already started, and the scope for collaboration with regional and international partners will be of benefit to our reputation as a responsible jurisdiction. And Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to note that the work to enhance our IP regime continues. It was only a few short months ago, in April of this year, that we passed our design rights law to allow for the direct registration of the unique designs of an industrial or handcraft item or part of it in the Cayman Islands. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands is working on offering better protection for various types of inventions. Specifically, the Ministry is currently liaising with the UK Intellectual Property Office to implement the Patent Corporation Treaty in Cayman, although there's still much discussion to be had in this regard. Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands is a prime jurisdiction for companies to base their operations, with excellent infrastructure, a world-class legal framework, and outstanding living standards to assist their work with intellectual property. We aim to create a well-defined business environment that attracts legitimate enterprises to our shores. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to work to ensure that the Cayman Islands remains a significant player in global finance for future generations to come. Thank you.
Have received a statement from the Honorable, the Acting Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for allowing me to issue a statement today to address recent suggestions by some members of the opposition that government should consider pursuing a Caymanians-only approach and effectively ban all non-Caymanians from working in any senior management roles within the civil service or any statutory authority or any government-owned company within 5 years. The suggestion invited the government to consider drastic policy change to the hiring practices of the wider public service, which employs over 6,000 employees. However, the debate to kick off this proposal quickly devolved into barbed language by the honorable member for Georgetown Central. The named objects of his ire, Mr. Speaker, were the acting governor and me as the acting deputy governor. And the offense which he offered as justification for his criticism was his inability to gain our support. Mr. Speaker, much was said, but it is not the practice of the civil service to exchange insults. Rather, Mr. Speaker, I offer this statement today because the suggestions offered yesterday paint a dreary picture of the public service which could not be further from the truth. Such suggestions are not founded and risk damaging the reputation of the civil service and demoralizing leaders who are making huge strides in talent development and service delivery. The original suggestion sought no requirement that Caymanians even needed to be suitably qualified to be appointed. That omission was subsequently remedied, but other troubles remained. This is not the first time that this suggestion has been raised. Just last year, the honorable member for Georgetown Central moved a motion of a very similar nature that was not accepted by this honorable House. That motion sought to mandate that the leadership roles in the fire and immigration departments must be filled by Caymanians only. It was pointed out at that time, but it bears repeating, that having qualified Caymanians in leadership roles remains a shared priority for all members of this honorable House. However, there are no shortcuts. At the time in question, one of the two departments already had a Caymanian leader, and the overall representation of Caymanians within the two departments exceeded 98%. Mr. Speaker, all members of this honorable House are united in their objective to maximize the participation of qualified Caymanians in our public service. Most of us realize, however, that it takes more than a law to achieve getting adequate quantities of Caymanian experts to fill the many diverse leadership roles required across the public sector. There is, however, a proven approach in place within the public sector. With the support of this honorable House, there is already legislation in place which supports a Caymanians first policy, all other things being equal. In contrast, the recent suggestion by the member for Georgetown Central can be summed up as a Caymanians only policy. The two may sound alike, but the approaches are worlds apart, and so too, I fear, would be the outcomes. With a Caymanians first policy as the Public Service Management and the Public Authorities Law currently support, Mr. Speaker, the public service has achieved a solid record of attracting and promoting highly qualified Caymanians to fill leadership roles. As of the end of 2018, the wider public service, including statutory authorities and government-owned companies, employed 4,705 Caymanians, making up 73% of their workforce. This is an outstanding achievement, Mr. Speaker, when one considers that this far exceeds the Caymanian participation rates in the overall labor force, inclusive of the private sector. Mr. Speaker, in 2018, the percentage of Caymanians in the wider labor force stood at 47%, in contrast to the 73% achieved within the public service last year. This success rate is even higher across the most senior roles in government, where, as of December 2018, 79%, or almost 8 out of every 10 heads of department, are Caymanian. Similarly, 73% of chief officers are Caymanian, with the sole exceptions being in specialized areas such as our oversight bodies and agencies providing legal services, most of whom are appointed by the governor in accordance with the Constitution. But based upon the suggestion offered yesterday, these results would not be meaningfully improved because it proposed excluding those senior roles which are appointed by the governor. Mr. Speaker, in the past 7 years, the head of the civil service has promoted 8 Caymanians to the senior rank of chief officer, and all were promoted from within the civil service, and not the world at large like the alternative facts proffered by the member for Georgetown Central. It is expected that another highly qualified Caymanian will be appointed shortly, bringing this total to 9. We will also announce shortly the promotion of 2 highly capable Caymanians to Deputy Chief Officer roles in the Ministry of Education. Mr. Speaker, these consistent actions demonstrate our commitments to training and promoting Caymanians. This is the fruit of a Caymanians First policy. Throughout 2018 and 2019, we continued to see a number of Caymanians appointed based on merit. Ms. Teresa Echeniki recently joined our senior management team with her appointment as the Chief Officer for the Ministry of Community Affairs. At head of department level, we have seen the appointment of Richard Sims to be Director of Environmental Health, which is his second HOD appointment since being promoted from the police service. Danielle Coleman has been appointed as Director of Hazard Management. Paulinda Mendoza-Williams as Director of Children and Family Services, and Peter Van Battenberg-Stafford as the Head of Competent Authority Services within the Department of International Tax Cooperation. At the Deputy Head of Department level, we have recently had the appointments of Nyasha Brady in Public Works Department and Brevin Elliott, Royal Charlton, and Tina Choi in the Fire Services. We have also seen promotions of Caymanians in our new Department of Work. These are just a few examples of how we are already facilitating the upward mobility of Caymanians across the service. Mr. Speaker, within the statutory authorities and government-owned companies, there is a similar success story. Approximately 83% of SAGCs employ a workforce which has 75% or higher Caymanian representation, and only 2 of the 23 statutory authorities are not headed by Caymanians. These are the achievements made possible by a Caymanians First policy, all other things being equal. These Caymanian leaders working in tandem with non-Caymanians in specialized roles have supported the government in delivering the national policy agenda, and collectively they are managing risks and costs while maximizing revenue. Today, working side by side with elected officials, the public service enjoys unprecedented financial success, earns clean audit opinions, attracts the highest level of tourist arrivals enjoyed in recent history, fends off threats that would derail our financial services industry, combats crime and the fear of crime, and bolsters economic conditions so that, all things being equal, Caymanians can obtain work throughout these islands and we can enjoy the lowest unemployment records in recent history. The public service facilitates free and fair elections delivered without incident. Even when election reforms are introduced, such as one person, one vote, or extraordinary constitutional provisions are called upon, like a people-initiated referendum. Our civil service leaders stand ready. These are the fruits of a Caymanians First policy. Around us, we are besieged with examples of countries that pursued isolationism and adopted policies which sold their people short, suggested that given the opportunity, they could not rise to the challenge. Instead, policies were adopted which mandate their nationals be employed even when they were not the most qualified. This approach, which is akin to the Caymanians only approach as advocated in the recent proposal, could promote complacency and reset the vision, not toward becoming a world-class civil service, but rather toward the idea of the public service becoming an employer of last resort, where Caymanians are hired primarily because they have to be. Our aim is to pursue talent strategies that make the civil service an employer of choice, where bright, hardworking Caymanians choose to be civil servants and apply their proven collective knowledge, skills, and experience to fulfilling our common purpose to make lives better. This strategy is allowing us to recruit highly qualified Caymanians from the private sector, including from leading law firms and other major companies. There are no shortcuts to getting the right people in the right place at the right time. And the blunt instrument of legislation, however well-intentioned, is both an inappropriate and ineffective tool for ensuring we have the talent needed to run our public service. Mr. Speaker, all of the outstanding civil and public servants that I have just mentioned have one thing in common. They are Caymanians who were promoted based on their capabilities. The government we serve deserves no less. The men and women who are entrusted to our leadership deserve no less. And most importantly, the public we are honored to serve deserves no less. The success of our beloved islands hinges on us having the best and brightest people in senior positions within the civil and public service, and we are committed to ensuring those candidates are Caymanian through the training offered and the opportunities provided. The really excellent news, Mr. Speaker, is that this exists for the vast majority of roles, and we already have a strategic plan to bolster this outcome. The recent proposal seeks a 5-year strategic plan to facilitate Caymanians taking up all senior positions across the public service. There is good news on this point. The civil service already has a 5-year strategic plan, which was launched just last year in January 2018. Our 5-year strategic plan to become a world-class civil service already contains leadership and talent development goals, which seek to ensure this service is positioned to better deliver the government's strategic outcomes. This will not only enable the civil service to fulfill its purpose to make lives better, but it also provides opportunities for Caymanians to have the personal development necessary to continue to fill the vast majority of leadership roles. In year 1 of the strategy, we delivered 8 senior leadership events with participation growing from 120 leaders for the first event to between 250 to 300 leaders for later events. Just at the midpoint of year 2 of the plan, some 180 supervisors and managers are completing their studies and earning qualifications from the Institute for Leadership and Management. Additionally, last year, 34 individuals earned Better Business Case Foundation qualifications, and 53 staff earned Project Management Fundamental qualifications. The training that the civil service has been delivering is also being delivered in those leading private sector companies who share a similar commitment to developing Caymanians. We are in good company, and in many of these development programs, the civil service was amongst the first in Cayman to pursue these strategies. In addition to classroom-based training, it is now commonplace for civil servants to also be exposed to on-the-job training through secondments to other roles and to informal coaching and mentoring. In areas in which it has been particularly difficult to attract qualified Caymanians, we have invested more heavily on growing internal talent. For example, the portfolio of the civil service is supporting one exceptional young Caymanian who has excelled in her job performance to participate in an external secondment to the UK, where she is undertaking a deep dive in the government audit profession. During her 18-month external secondment, this high-potential Caymanian candidate is being groomed for future opportunities and exposed to a diversity of audit projects that would otherwise have taken her years to achieve locally. She returns home next month, where she will undertake a 4-month secondment as a Deputy Chief Officer in the portfolio of the Civil Service, and will receive mentoring and coaching from senior leaders before rejoining her team as a Deputy Director of the Internal Audit Service. These opportunities are possible because since her appointment, she has done more than was asked of her. She undertook studies in a wide range of topics and excelled in every qualification. She worked late, volunteered for difficult assignments, and showed up with exceptional team spirit no matter what else was on her plate. It was also possible because her non-Caymanian leader sought her out and recruited her into the civil service. He recognized her potential and trained and mentored her, and when she went off to the UK to commence her secondment, When he was also there, he checked in on her and with her managers to ensure her secondment was proceeding smoothly. I ought to mention that in the past 3 years, both the non-Caymanian leader and the aspiring Caymanian leader have received Deputy Governor awards recognizing their significant contributions and exceptional performance. When we talk about being world-class, we are talking about people who seize opportunities, are problem solvers and not problem identifiers, who are capable of delivering through others, and who don't take anything for granted. They are hungry to be better and to do better and to deliver the best results on behalf of the people of these islands. The aspiring leader previously mentioned has had to make tough calls in her role within the audit profession. I don't mind sharing that some of them have even been adverse to me, but she did not shy away. She did her homework and she could support her findings. And in the end, she has earned promotions, but also something more precious than promotion. She has garnered respect. Her findings improved our policies and resulted in savings for this country. That is the outcome of a Caymanians first and not a Caymanians only approach. We aim to hire and promote Caymanian men and women who are qualified and competent and who do not feel they owe their position to anyone. Because when they are called upon to give their expert opinion, they need to do so without fear or favor, and they need to be prepared to defend their position. Only a competent person can withstand the pressure. And Mr. Speaker, the public service doesn't believe in promoting people into positions where we set them up to fail. The overall approach is met with the strong support of our staff. In this civil service, 87% of our staff say they are proud to be civil servants. The civil service has also supported talent development by developing an agreed terms of reference for heads of profession, which will support talent development across individual career paths. Professional competencies are being formalized, and learning and development opportunities are aligned for employees in specific professional groups. Our Strategic Workforce Planning Initiative is underway, which will expand our HR toolkit to help us better project future talent needs and prepare our existing workforce to take advantage of the evolving business opportunities arising within the civil service. The suggestion that was made calls for legislative change to mandate that senior roles be filled by Caymanians only. We must, and we are, hiring and promoting highly qualified Caymanians, and we are doing so with a Caymanians first policy when all else is equal. Mr. Speaker, we have an overarching responsibility within the civil service to ensure that first and foremost, we appoint the right people with the right skills to civil service positions. The totality of qualifications, skills, knowledge, and experience a candidate brings to the table are the determining factors in an appointment decision. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, it is right to ensure that suitably qualified Caymanians are given a preference in filling these roles when they are competitive, and we already have legislation, the PSML, that does this. The Public Service Management Law and Personnel Regulations currently provide an enabling mechanism for Caymanians found to rank broadly the same to be given preference for civil service roles. The last alternative scenario put forward for a Caymanians-only approach is that it is required to prepare for an eventuality when the Cayman Islands might go independent. Mr. Speaker, one needs only to hark back to 2018, when unexpectedly we were without the presence of the Queen's appointed representative for a period of 5 months. Not a single day was lost. The civil service machinery performed as it should, and across the civil service, chief officers and heads of departments stepped up to seamlessly support good governance, internal security, and the functioning of the civil service. We did what we were appointed to do. Mr. Speaker, I hope that we continue to be unified in our commitment to insist that any persons who hold positions within our civil service generally, but more specifically in our leadership positions, should be suitably qualified, experienced, and capable to carry out their mandates with a commitment that all things being equal, it is a Caymanian first policy. It is an established fact that our current legislation, the PSML, makes appropriate provision for ensuring suitably qualified Caymanians are given every opportunity and an advantage to be appointed to civil service positions, including the roles at senior level. It is equally true, Mr. Speaker, that we prioritize above all else that successful candidates must have the best balance of qualifications, skills, knowledge, and experience for the positions. Mr. Speaker, given the success we have had and continue to have across the service and the wider public service, we have to conclude that this approach is the right approach. Promoting a Caymanians-only policy is both dangerous and demoralizing for all the people who got their positions through hard work, meeting opportunity. The recent suggestion recommended drastic change to solve a problem that is mischaracterized. It may be insulting to Caymanians who currently fill the vast majority of roles at all levels of our service and who have achieved this outcome through their hard work, commitment, and competence. It may also be demoralizing to the hundreds of others who are making steady progress towards this goal. Mr. Speaker, working hand in hand with the elected government, our civil service delivers results that we can all be proud of. While the member for Georgetown Central does not seem to think much of the job that the acting governor and I are doing, which is his right, I wonder if he realizes the message his broader comments have sent to the hundreds of others Caymanian managers who are responsible for appointments. Between us, the acting governor and I may have a span of, say, 35 appointments. The other 3,850 civil servants are hired by chief officers and heads of department, both of whom are overwhelmingly Caymanian. The message received is clear. One young Caymanian civil servant recently asked the deputy governor if he was going to support this motion, to which he responded no, but then inquired why she asked. Her response was a somber reminder for all of us in this honorable house. She said, "I have been in the civil service for 10 years. I have my degree and experience, and I was just promoted to a managerial role. I don't want anyone to say that my next promotion was achieved just because I was Caymanian." Mr. Speaker, does anyone want to feel that way? We have exceptional talent that has worked hard, pursued their academic qualifications, gained relevant experience, and presented themselves as the most qualified candidate for at least 8 out of 10 senior level roles across the public sector. This percentage is even higher when you back out specialized roles in the medical, aviation, education, policing, and regulatory fields, where we've had to augment qualified Caymanian talent with other qualified talent from persons who joined us from elsewhere, just to fill all of the roles we need to fill. We are so blessed in this country, Mr. Speaker. The success that has been achieved in the Cayman Islands with the support of its civil service is the envy of most countries. It would appear against this backdrop that some would rather create new challenges by pursuing shortcuts that are not fit for purpose. While we will always seek to find common ground, it cannot be at the expense of politicizing the civil service and compromising the principles for which the civil service stands, including merit-based appointments. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I am reminded of the words of poet laureate Maya Angelou, who famously said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." The language. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That quote was so appropriate, I don't think you should have left it there. But it bears repeating. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. I think that was worth me repeating. For me as an elected person, the Honorable Member from Newlands, elected member from Newlands. Savannah.
This is just to say, Madam Speaker, the passion with which our...
I know you're not blind today either.
The governor brought this, it was very touching. I want to take my hat off to her.
The elected member from Town West, you have a question?
Yeah, in a roundabout way, Mr. Speaker, but just want to record in this honorable house my respect and admiration for the acting deputy governor, which is Maro Deep. I've always found her professional and courteous, and I can tell her standing with me has remained very strong, and she's a competent person, very competent.
Personal explanations. Obituary and other ceremonial speeches.
None.
Raising a matter of privilege.
None.
Government business, bills, second readings. The Public Management and Finance Amendment Bill 2019.
The Honorable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Public Management and Finance Amendment Bill 2019.
The bill has been duly moved. Is the Honorable Minister speaking thereto?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to present the Public Management and Finance Amendment Bill 2019 on behalf of the government, and we'll refer to it hereafter as the bill. Mr. Speaker, the bill seeks to amend the Public Management and Finance Law 2018 revision to address certain constraints being experienced in the delivery of outputs since the changes made in 2016, to a multi-year budget cycle. Mr. Speaker, the bill seeks first to allow appropriations to lapse or expire at the end of each budget period, which encompasses 2 financial years, as opposed to the end of each financial year. Secondly, to extend the deadline for the submission of the government's annual report to the Office of the Auditor General from the 30th of April to the 31st of May, and to allow the date for the presentation of supplementary appropriation bills to the Legislative Assembly for approval to be moved to the 31st of March of the year following the financial year to which the supplementary expenditures relate. Mr. Speaker, I will now present details with respect to the clauses of the bill that is now before the House. The bill's first proposed amendment is allowing for appropriations to lapse at the end of each budget period, as opposed to lapsing at the end of the financial year, of each financial year. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Section 9, subsection 5 of the law, appropriations currently lapse or expire at the end of each financial year, which is the 31st of December. As honourable members are aware, appropriations give honourable ministers, official members of Cabinet and oversight committees of the Legislative Assembly the authority to incur executive expenses, make equity investments, acquire or create executive assets, and to lend and borrow money. Following government's move to a multi-year budget which covers 2 financial years, ministries, portfolios, and offices have expressed the view that it would be more efficient for the delivery of government projects, priorities, and outputs if unspent appropriations could be carried forward from one year to the next. For example, Mr. Speaker, last year there were several instances where projects were either not started by or started but incomplete at the end of the financial year, and the funds budgeted for that project lapsed or expired. In our last meeting, a good portion of the supplementary budget approved by this Honourable House was to reapprove the expired funding in order to continue or complete projects in the current financial year. In the intervening months, Mr. Speaker, in the absence of approved funding, these projects could not be progressed. Mr. Speaker, this proved to be a most unsatisfactory state of affairs. The bill will therefore allow for the unspent or unused balance of appropriations to carry forward into year 2 of the budget period. As we know, Mr. Speaker, The law defines a budget period as being a period of 2 financial years. The advantages of the unspent or unused balance of appropriations not lapsing at the end of each financial year include increased flexibility for the seamless continuation and funding of government projects, priorities, and outputs. And secondly, less bureaucracy, as the need to request Cabinet and Finance Committee's approval for supplementary funding would be reduced. For further clarification, Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to have a multi-year budget that covers a 2-year period, and the Finance Committee will continue to approve appropriations for each individual financial year within the 2-year budget period. However, at the end of year 1, unspent or unused balances within all appropriations will be allowed to carry forward into year 2 of the budget period if this bill is passed. Appropriations will, however, lapse or expire at the end of each budget period. That is, at the end of year 2 of the budget period. To illustrate, Mr. Speaker, the next budget period starts on the 1st of January 2020. It ends on the 31st of December 2021. The bill will allow for unspent or unused balances in appropriations at the 31st of December 2020 to carry forward into the 2021 financial year, and all unspent or unused balances in appropriations at the 31st of December 2021, the end of the budget period, they will lapse or expire. Finally, Mr. Speaker, Finance Committee's approval will have to continue to be sought in order to transfer funds between different appropriations within a budget period, and the government will continue to prepare annual reports at the end of each financial year for audit by the Auditor General. Mr. Speaker, the second proposed amendment to the law is allowing for the extension of the deadline of the submission of the government's annual report to the Office of the Auditor General from the 30th of April to the 31st of May. Individual government entities presently have to submit an annual report inclusive of financial statements to the Auditor General's office within 2 months after the fiscal year end, thereby establishing a deadline of the 28th of February in the following year for submission to the Auditor General's office. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General is presently required to express audit opinions on the financial statements of individual government entities within 2 months of receiving the financial statements from the individual government entity. This establishes a deadline of April 30th for rendering of the Auditor General's opinion. Mr. Speaker, the Treasury Department is then required to consolidate the audited financial statements of individual government entities, prepare a government annual report, and submit it to the Auditor General by the same date as the Auditor General could be concluding the audits of individual government entities' financial statements, which become part of the consolidated financial statements, and that common date is the 30th of April. The Treasury Department has expressed the view that it needs additional time to consolidate and prepare the government's annual report, especially because there is often insufficient time to make any necessary adjustments to the consolidated financial statements arising from the audits of the individual accounts. As such, the bill proposes to extend the submission deadline of the government's annual report to the Auditor General by 1 month to the 31st of May instead of the law's current 30th of April date. Mr. Speaker, this will also mean that the date the Auditor General expresses an audit opinion on the government's annual report will also be extended by 1 month from the 31st of May to the 30th of June, 6 months after the financial year end. Mr. Speaker, the third and last amendment to the law proposed by the bill is allowing for the date for the presentation of supplementary appropriation bills to the Legislative Assembly for approval to be moved to 31st of March of the year following the financial year to which the supplementary expenditures relate. Mr. Speaker, the law currently requires a supplementary appropriation bill to be approved by the Legislative Assembly before the end of each financial year. That is, by December the 31st in each year. It is, however, impossible for the government to continue to incur supplementary expenditure up to the end of each financial year and comply with the law to present a supplementary appropriation bill to the Legislative Assembly for approval by the end of that same financial year. Simply doesn't work, Mr. Speaker. Further, there have been instances where the Auditor General has opined on financial statements of government, including an emphasis of matter paragraph in the report, drawing readers' attention to the fact that the Legislative Assembly's approval by the end of the financial statement, by the end of the financial year to which supplementary expenditures relate, was not obtained for such supplementary expenditures, which is contrary to law. The bill therefore proposes to extend the deadline for presentation of supplementary appropriation bills to the Legislative Assembly for approval to the 1st of March of the year following the financial year to which supplementary expenditures relate. Mr. Speaker, extending the deadline to the 31st of March is more appropriate and achievable by the government, as the first meeting of the Legislative Assembly in each new year usually takes place by the end of March. Mr. Speaker, turning now to the bill itself. The bill achieves the proposed amendments to the law that I have just described and is summarized as follows. Clause 1 provides a short title of the legislation. Clause 2 amends Section 9 of the law to provide that appropriations lapse at the end of each budget period, instead of at the end of each financial year. And Clauses 3 and 4 amend Sections 11 and 12 of the law to adjust the references to the deadline for the introduction of a supplementary appropriation bill in the Legislative Assembly to the 31st day of March following the financial year to which the authorized executive transactions or the executive expenses in the appropriation bill relate. Mr. Speaker, Clause 5 currently seeks to amend Section 29A1, subsection 1 of the law to extend the submission date for the government's annual report, including the consolidated financial statements, to the Auditor General by 1 month. Mr. Speaker, Section 29A, subsection 7 of the law requires the Cabinet to gazette the government's annual report by the 30th of June in a succeeding year, that is, 6 months after the end of a financial year. If this bill is passed, the Auditor General will have a 1-month extension, that is, to the 30th of June, to express an opinion on the government's consolidated financial statements. Therefore, without a further change to the law, the Cabinet will be required to gazette the government's annual report by the 30th of June, the same date the Auditor General expresses an opinion on the financial statement. This will make it very difficult, if not impossible, Mr. Speaker, for Cabinet to comply with the law. The current Clause 5 of the bill, however, fails to amend Section 29A, subsection 7 of the law to extend the gazettal of the government's annual report by 1 month. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 52.1 and subsection 1 and 2, I give notice that I will seek to move in the committee stage to the bill's consideration an amendment to Clause 5, the purpose of which is to effect a further change to the law, which should be made because it is a needed follow-on consequential change given the other amendments proposed by the bill. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance consulted with the Auditor General on the proposed amendments to the law, and she confirmed that she had no objections to the proposed changes as set out in the bill. Mr. Speaker, I commend the Public Management and Finance Amendment Bill 2019 to this Honourable House for passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? The member from Bordentown West.
Chris, your lectern. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 years since being elected to this honorable house, the members of the official opposition have taken the approach that there are some areas that our level of confidence is so deep that even during Finance Committee, our questions are very limited due to the respect that we have for the people that provides the information. Mr. Speaker, one of the things with auditing, and I'm sure the Honorable Minister of Finance may remember this during his audit time, is that when you're auditing an organization, one of the first things you do is you test the controls. If the controls are found to be strong, Mr. Speaker, it means you can rely on the information that the system produces. Equally so, Mr. Speaker, if the controls are found to be weak, then it means that you'll have to do more testing and look at more information to get some level of comfort. Mr. Speaker, the official opposition is understanding of the extra month where the Auditor General is concerned. And we do understand that because the government is a very big entity. It's a lot of departments, a lot of ministries, and it's a lot of transactions. But, Mr. Speaker, we have not gotten the level of comfort that we need with regards to the spending automatically moving into the next year. That, Mr. Speaker, is a problem. Mr. Speaker, several months ago, members of this honorable house was united when there was an overreach by the judiciary and in terms of encroaching on the roles and responsibility of this legislature. Just as though we had problems with the overreach then, Mr. Speaker, I must say, we're going to have problems with the underperformance of some ministries and departments within government. The overreach is unacceptable and the underperformance is definitely unacceptable. Earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, I commended the Ministry of Finance for the timeliness and the quickness in which they put out their annual report. I believe at that time, and I've said it then, that what they did, what they produced, and the time in which it was presented was representative of world class. And at the time, I think if memory serves me right, I also said that that is a lesson or a model or an example for other areas of government to follow. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you from my own interactions with members within the finance and the portfolio team that Mr. Ken Jefferson, Mr. Matthew Tibbetts, Ms. Ann Eubanks, all professional. And I can tell you, Ann Owen, sorry, my bad. Thanks for the correction. Very good. Equally so, you have other areas within the Ministry of Finance, including the Economic and Statistics Office. Staff there is very good, very professional. These are people, if I have any queries or anything, I can tell you, respond even quicker than when I even made such requests when I was employed in the private sector in some senior roles. I can say to you, Mr. Speaker, without a shadow of a doubt and fear of any contradiction, the staff that we have in the Ministry of Finance is world class. I can't take that from them. And it's a little bit saddened to see that rather than the government try to emulate what the Ministry of Finance is doing, because of certain performers within government who cannot plan right, who cannot budget right, who cannot manage right, we are now looking to adjust the law to meet these people who are underperforming. Mr. Speaker, there is no need, absolutely none, for us to change the law that requires spending approved in 1 year for the money to go automatically into the next year. Mr. Speaker, I want to say to my honorable colleagues in this House who are members of Cabinet that what is being proposed is simply this. When a ministry does not get something right, project falls behind, is not going according to plan, the public servants, the civil servants, the ministry staff is required to prepare a cabinet paper that will go to them for them to discuss, approve, and come to this House and ask for appropriations. If a department has a spend of 10 million for 1 year and 10 million into the next year, and within the first year they have not spent 1 cent, but they know it automatically, they can get it back because it moves into the next year. For members of Cabinet who will have to sit down and also ensure that their colleagues do their job, they're going to lose that because no people will be coming to Cabinet because there will be no requirement for any funds to be requested. No one will be able to sit down and justify why or explain to their colleagues why someone has messed up or why something is not delivered or why a project that's a priority for the government isn't performing as it should. In essence, Mr. Speaker, we're going into silos within the Cabinet. This cannot be good governance nor best practice. And if the ministers are willing to allow another minister to run rogue and not bring a cabinet paper to explain why a project is behind, but trust him or her to do their job, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that is on them politically, but that is not best practice, that is not world class, and that is not good governance for individuals who are bound by collective responsibility. Because now, Mr. Speaker, you can, if you have 20 million approved over 2 years, you can literally have to wait till that 20 million is exhausted before a paper even goes to Cabinet. And if ministers want to sit back and be comfortable with that, that's on them. That I can't comment on. However, Mr. Speaker, for every single member of this House who's a member of the Finance Committee, we must also recognize that we too will be left in the dark. Because when people are not performing as they should, we get that opportunity in Finance Committee. When the appropriate or the supplementary request comes back before us, we get to ask questions. We have already met the public service halfway. They have asked that the annual budget process was too cumbersome. We said, fine. The Honorable House approved 2-year budget cycle, approved 1 year each time. So we only have the budget process once every 2 years. Now, all of a sudden, well, guess what, guys? We're not sure if we're going to spend it in the first 12 months, maybe in the next 15, 16 months. We don't know. So now, we want the money to be used over a 2-year period. Mr. Speaker, this makes no sense. And if Cabinet can't get the relevant Cabinet papers to discuss these appropriations, then there'll be no finance committee other than if you're moving money between different areas. If you can't spend $500–600 million over 12 months, why then should we sit down and trust you to spend over $1 billion over a 2-year period? Because this is the amount of money we're talking about. This isn't small amount of money, Mr. Speaker. We're talking now over $1 billion being spent before anybody can, before this House can have their eyes on that kind of money. This is not just for projects, Mr. Speaker. This is every single budget item line. Whether it be salaries, whether it be money to NAU, anything. This is what we're asking. So, Mr. Speaker, as a member of this House who worked very hard to get into this House, and have the responsibility of ensuring that the public money is spent properly and accounted properly, I cannot acquiesce to some lazy people who cannot plan right, who cannot manage right, who cannot get it right, that we must not allow them now because I didn't spend the money this year, I automatically give it to you next year. That happens nowhere in the private sector. Mr. Speaker, in one of my jobs before I came here, I was a chief financial officer with a balance sheet of $2 billion. And Mr. Speaker, never in my accounting life have I prepared a budget that if I have never spent the money that year, I get it the next year. I have to go back and explain to my board of directors why I didn't spend the money, and if needs be, if I need more money for the next year, why I need more money for next year. I don't automatically get that money. Well, don't worry, I always kept my job because I always got my budget right. And you see, Mr. Speaker, this is a step backward for what it is that the civil servants are capable of. Last year, Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, the Public Accounts Committee awarded many government agencies for the timeliness and the accuracies of their government reports. So I was a little bit lost, Mr. Speaker, in understanding where this request is coming from, when there are many hardworking people who have worked tirelessly over many years to get the government finances to where it is today. For us now, for a few people who can't get it right, for them to do this. Mr. Speaker, the simple definition of a budget is a financial plan for a defined period of time, usually 1 year. I cannot understand why all of a sudden now people want money to be spent in a 24-month window as opposed to a 12-month window. And it still begs one question: what happened after 2 years and nothing is done? You still have to come back. So is a question of, do we wait to measure them after 2 years or do we wait to measure them after 1 year? Either way, they have to be measured. And Mr. Speaker, for every person in the real world, they're normally measured over a 1-year cycle. And this is what it is that we need to stick to. So, Mr. Speaker, when I look back and I think about the bill itself, the minister referred to the constraint from our multi-year budget. The reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, is that we understand the multi-year budget would have made life easier for the civil servants because it's a cumbersome process and they only get to do it once every 2 years. Now, the constraint is that, well, we're not sure if it's going to be done in 12 months or 15 months or 18 months, so we need a little bit more time. Then, Mr. Speaker, you know what the next issue is going to be? Well, the procurement process is too much, it's too rigid. Mr. Speaker, when we're spending the public's money, we should not make it easy for people to spend the public's money. This is something that we should take very seriously. And one of the things about democracy itself, it says if you can't find consensus, the status quo remains. I cannot support anything that makes poor planners who can't sit down and get a budget right to hide behind the fact that money slips from 1 year, automatically slips into the next year. Mr. Speaker, earlier today, we saw certain reports being tabled. I couldn't help but wonder, Mr. Speaker, when I saw that part of the tabling included the Ministry of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs annual financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2013. Also for the year ended 30th of June 2014, and for the year ended 30th of June 2015. Here we are, Mr. Speaker, in July 2019, and we now have reports being tabled for the 30th of June 2013. This, Mr. Speaker, is not world class. This is not best practice. And Mr. Speaker, we should not be doing anything to encourage this kind of behavior to continue. So, Mr. Speaker, what I want to make clear to my members inside here, understand that if we support this bill in its entirety, as is presented here today, do not expect to have a finance committee anytime soon to discuss supplementary appropriations to find out what is going on. And just as though we didn't want the courts overreaching in areas that are reserved for us, we cannot sit down and hand this responsibility over to the civil servants. We are the stewards of the public's money. We are the one given this task. And I'm not prepared at this point, Mr. Speaker, to allow $1 billion to be spent in this country automatically without us stopping at least every 12 months to say, guys, what have you done with the money over the last year? This is not the way for us to move forward. What I would like to see, Mr. Speaker, is the other ministries follow the example of the Ministry of Finance in the timeliness and the accurateness in which they produce their reports. That is what we should be striving for. And for the chief officers who cannot manage their projects, this is the time for them to pack their bags and go. We are running a government. We're in the business of making people lives. We are not here to change the law for allow you to do your job easier because you can't do what you have. This is the tail wagging the dog, Mr. Speaker. This is not what it is. And any member of this honorable House who's willing to hand their responsibility over to other public servants, and then for us to go to the people and give an account of what is being done, this is not going to work. So, Mr. Speaker, I will say this much, and I will leave it at that, because I do recognize that ultimately the government has the votes to do whatever it is they want on that side. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to close with just one thing I want the members to consider. One of my second jobs at a university, Mr. Speaker, was working for Cable and Wireless at a time in which it was a monopoly. And that year, Mr. Speaker, Cable and Wireless was just raking in money. Because technically, they had no competition. They were just doing very well. But then competition came, Mr. Speaker, and things started going south. And what we did at that time, Mr. Speaker, we introduced something called a balanced scorecard concept. Some members in this House I know are already familiar with it based on discussions I've had. And in a sense, Mr. Speaker, what the balanced scorecard concept is this. Most companies look at their financial performance to gauge how well they're doing. And what the balanced scorecard said is, you know what? No. You have to be looking at other things. And what the balanced scorecard did was, in addition to the financial metric, it introduced 3 more categories. He said, let us look at our internal processes, let us look at our ability to innovate, and let us look at our customer service level. Cable and Wireless at that point was through the roof on the financial metric. Customer service level, poor. We recognize that. This is public information. When you look at the ability to innovate, poor. Because at that time, they were using something called POTS, and the era was moving to PANS. And what POTS was plain old telephone service, and PANS was pretty amazing new stuff, or pretty amazing neat stuff. And that's where the old networking, upgrading, and everything started to come around. But also internal processes. It was just too tied up to everything. And we did an overall look at the organization and see many changes needed to be made. And some of it required personnel, because some people still had the same old monopoly thinking. Thus the saying, the same thinking that got us into this mess cannot be the same thinking that's going to take us out of this mess. And this proposal here of what's being proposed of moving this money is now that same old thinking that created the previous financial mess we had where we couldn't get nothing. And here we are now finally bending the corner of having best practice and world-class standards. And now we're going to reduce accountability, reduce government, reduce measurability, simply because a few people can't get it right. I listened to the passionate statement by the Honorable Acting Deputy Governor. And Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday and I said today, this year would have been 30 years when I first entered the civil servant. And there are a lot of dedicated, hard-working, professional people there. And I can say from my own interactions of dealing with many governments in many countries, we have one of the best government entities to deal with. Don't let anybody fool you. Because if you think you see bureaucracy yet, you can go to some countries and you can find bureaucracy. There's not many places in the world where a government can issue a report and you can literally take up the phone and call the author of that report and have a discussion with it. Very rare. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I'll go as far as to say one of our biggest problems is sometimes we publish too much information that goes overseas and other people see stuff that they shouldn't see because we talk too much about ourselves sometimes. But that is the level of professionalism and dedication we have in the civil service. And this bill, coming right here now to ask for this, is an insult to the hard-working people in the finance team that gets it right, an insult to the many other ministries and portfolios and departments that get it right, who stay long, work hard, give up family time, for just a few people who can sit back and lobby for this. This is not representative of the civil service, I know, Mr. Speaker, and as such, I cannot accept this bill or support this bill in its entirety. Thank you very much.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Honorable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member of the Opposition, are you contemplating or are you going to speak? Which one?
Mr. Speaker, I have been in this honorable house for some nigh on 19 years. I've seen them come and I've seen them go. And I can tell you this, Mr. Speaker, I mightn't be here after the next time, but I can see some go too. Trust me. Because I'll take people on as a project too. Sure. You hear? You hear? You hear that member from Prospect? No, I ain't been dying for no opportunity. You just relax. That's what you do. You relax. Mr. Member from Prospect, because Mr. Speaker, what I want to do, let me go on to my debate. Yeah, that's a good thing. Mr. Speaker, my contribution to this Public Management and Finance Amendment Bill 2019. Mr. Speaker, I would like first to provide a history over the last 18 years of how we reach where we are. The AG say what it has to do with that. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, we remember how we were doing cash budgeting and spending. We thought that wasn't good enough. And a few people made trips down to New Zealand and brought us into cruel accounting, decentralizing the accounts in government. That was supposed to bring us into the new world. It has never been the same. We remember that was the then person responsible for finance, the Honorable MacArthur, and the former leader of government business, Kurt Tibbetts. No, he was former leader of government business too, but at the time he was in the opposition, yes. Mr. Speaker, we did everything possible to make that work. We even came back here at one time, Mr. Speaker, to legitimize some of the work that they didn't do. Yep. Those were the teething times for that system in government. Along came the former Minister of Finance, who made another trip overseas to the dependent territories and came back with another system. A mere 4 years ago, which said, and we were convinced that 2-year budgeting was the answer to all our troubles. So on the 6th of July, 2019, we're right back. Mr. Speaker, I submit that all of those changes were done to address people who were not capable of managing a budget. Mr. Speaker, the 2-year budgeting, some 4 years ago, was put in place because the complaint was that we weren't able to do budgets on a yearly basis. That companies all over this world, a friend of mine in Silicon Valley employs 264,000 people. But he has 1-year budgets. How much do we employ? 10,000? Government. 4,000 or 5,000, 6,000. Mr. Speaker, I didn't support that then, about 2-year budgeting. We have gone through 2 budgets, 2-year budgets, I think. Or we are almost through the second one. Now, Mr. Speaker, when we objected to it, we were assured that expenditures would be based on a yearly basis. Therefore, the Public Management and Finance Law was going to require reporting on a yearly basis. It does. True. And it still will be. But I want to know how we're going to report monies that has had to be carried over. And the minister can explain that, but hear me first. The problem we were having all these years was that when they saw the end of the year coming under the cash system, they would go and spend it all. Because they know they couldn't get it by, in those days, Mr. Speaker, it was the 31st day of December, like we have gone back to now. When the advent of Hurricane Ivan made us went to the 30th of June, 1st of July, 3rd of June, 1st of July. And then, prior to Hurricane Ivan, it was 30th of June. Then the advent of Hurricane Ivan meant that the election was on top of us in May. So we had to now change back to the 31st of December. That's how it went. So, back to the quick expenditures year end coming up to try and get rid of the cash that, or your budget, because you hadn't done anything all year. You hadn't managed your budget properly all year, so you now have to rush to spend the money for fear that if you don't represent the entire amount spent, then you will not get it in the next year. You lose it. That is expected to be spent in the budget. So last Finance Committee, we saw it happening again. We're in the Ombudsman office. Remember now, my memory is quite good. Mr. Speaker, they created another account in another department and transferred that money to. In the meantime, I stood here and defended the now Minister of Finance and questioned how he and the Financial Secretary could properly report that that money had been expended on behalf of the country when it wasn't, it was in somebody's account. There were all kinds of excuses for that. No, my good friends, we are coming here and legitimizing that kind of behavior. Mr. Speaker, I have a little affinity to the Minister of Finance. And the other one, what name? Financial Secretary. But I beseech them, do not allow people who can't manage the people's finance, do not allow them to coerce you in to doing things so that they can look good when they haven't done their job. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Finance has been in the financial industry, in the private sector, but more so one of the managing partners for KPMG, I think it was. One of the big five. No one know what, Mr. Speaker. He had the opportunity to retire from that company. Unlike anyone who would have been doing this kind of thing, wanting to carry over the budget, they would have been fired. He knows, Mr. Speaker, that it is important when the global KPMG approves his budget, it is done on a yearly basis. And he must be within 10% or some percentage, plus or minus, on that budget, and he must even justify that. That's how he got the opportunity to retire in old age, you know. Well, not too old, but. Or at least serve his time out there as managing partner. Normal age of retirement. Or Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance, like they say, he hasn't reached the normal age of retirement yet. Anyway, whatever it was, at least he retired with a golden parachute. But what we are doing here is we're going to give people the opportunity to do this. Done nothing all year. Don't manage your you know, Mr. Speaker, you see these young ones that got the physical size about them? Who like sparring off and shaping up in front of you? Through that door, Mr. Speaker, through that door. Right there. Trying to distract me. The member from Prospect, you know, shuffling around there. Shadow boxing me, you know. Yeah. He's a little. Mr. Speaker, I think maybe I should bring to your attention that the member from Prospect is showing less than respect for me by saying that I'm telling lies. Now he needs to withdraw that, or he needs to prove it now.
Honorable member, are you intended to finish your speech in 5 minutes?
No, Mr. Speaker, the member from Prospect off mic is casting aspersions and about me telling lies. No, everybody has heard it. You might not have heard it, but everybody has heard it. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I expect him to withdraw it now.
Honorable members, the orders, standing orders, tells us we can't impute improper motives to any member. And the member, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, has complained that a member has done that. In fact, he has named the member from Prospect. Standing orders 35. 3, 4, I think would come into play. Honorable member from Prospect, you've heard the member's accusation. I must say I did not hear it. I don't know if other members, how the members accusing and saying that other members how. I did not hear. But you would have to stand and say whether you accept that the member's point and that you apologize, if so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of this Honourable House. At no time, I'm familiar with the standing order, and I thank the Speaker for reading it for myself and others. At no time did I make such a statement and call the name of the member speaking, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, nor was I looking at him when such an alleged comment was made. I will admit, carrying on a conversation as I walked into this house before the door had closed, where I was commenting to those on the outset as I entered. But I do not accept the allegation of breach of conduct or otherwise as placed by the Leader of the Opposition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As I said, honorable members, I didn't hear it. What you are saying is that when you came into the door, you were talking to someone. Yes. Honorable member for the Leader of the Opposition, we have long been here, me and you. I think you should move on.
Mr. Speaker, I know that member deliberately indicated to me that I was telling lies. I know that. But Mr. Speaker, I've been here long enough, like you say, you and I. Everyone else heard it.
I didn't.
No, other than yourself, Mr. Speaker.
I'll tell you why, once you're off.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I understand that you may have been distracted with something else. I understand that. And I'm not questioning the chair. I'm not questioning the chair. But there shall be another time. I know there will be another time. Trust me. He must learn to behave himself. His size does not frighten anyone in here. In particular, it doesn't frighten me. Must learn to behave himself and have respect for the members like everybody else does for him. That's how I was taught by your good self, sir. Mr. Speaker, I just want to go on to say to the Financial Secretary and the Minister for Finance is that part and parcel of the responsibility laid out in the Public Management and Finance Law is for the chief officer's responsibility is to manage the public funds. Part of their contract with the civil service also entails that. Maybe not in the exact words that I am saying, but they have absolute responsibility when this legislature, on behalf of the people of this country, approves expenditures, that they have a responsibility to ensure those are done in accordance with what has been approved here.
Honorable member, will you be carrying on much long?
Not much longer, but
More than 5 minutes?
yeah, maybe a little.
Honorable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2 to allow the business of the House to continue beyond hour 4:30 p.m.
Question is that standing orders be suspended in order for the House to continue after the hour of 4:30 p.m. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Honorable member, you may continue your speech, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was on the issue of the responsibility of chief officers. Chief officers, as I said, have this responsibility to ensure that monies are expended on behalf of the people to provide services for the people in accordance with what has been approved here. If that is on a yearly basis, then that is how it should be. It is unfortunate that they do not manage the monies of this country well enough. Therefore, the minister now has to come back and legitimize the carrying over from one year into the next of monies that should have been spent in the previous year. Mr. Speaker, that speak volumes. That speak volumes about how we are managing the finances of this country. It speak volumes. And I certainly cannot, with good conscience, support it. Anywhere else, in any business, it is a requirement that monies are spent judiciously, efficiently, effectively. And because you didn't do your job, we can't endorse you carrying monies over into the next year. So then you carry it on, and there is a perpetual thing. Keep carrying it forward and carrying it forward. Well, if you didn't do it in this year, and I appreciate what you're saying, you can't go past the budget period. Understood. But if you, I agree, But, Mr. Speaker, my argument is, if you didn't do it this year, and you got 30% of your budget that you carry over into the second year, what happened with the work you were going to do in the second year? That has to be, something will happen to that because you got to do this one that you didn't do last year. Now, at the end of the budget year period, 30% or 20% of what you were supposed to do over the full last year will not be done too. So you're coming back in another 2-year period to get the monies for that too. That's what is going to happen. So we are in a perpetual lack of services being provided, basically, if you're not doing your job. That's what I meant with it. Yeah, at the end of the budget period, it will have to be rebudgeted. But you got double work now in the last year of that period. So something is going to suffer. Someone needs to tell me what is going to suffer. So for that, the budget period of 2 years, we're expecting $1 billion to be spent, billion plus, to be spent in them 2 years, and 30% of it is not spent in those 2 years. We have to rebudget for that if it's necessary. By that time, the projects might be null and void. True. Could be. But we are nevertheless going to allow that. I can't support that. As much as I like you, Mr. Minister, I can't support that. I can't support that. We cannot address lack of efficiency by changing the rules midway through. I'm not going to support that. If you can't manage your budget, and I'm not talking about the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker, if you can't manage your budget in that 1 year within 10%, 15%, I don't know what the rules are, then you shouldn't be managing a budget. You really shouldn't. You need to find someone else to manage that budget on behalf of the people of the Cayman Islands. I thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am also going to give my comments on this bill. And while I can't speak from the perspective of a CPA like my colleague from Bottomtown West, I have had enough experience in the private sector managing projects to immediately see some red flags with what is being proposed in this bill. Mr. Speaker, I really have to wonder where this is coming from. Because, as the Leader of the Opposition said, not so long ago we were in here looking at a similar situation where funds that had been allocated were moved around in a way that they could have potentially been undetected and preserved for a following year. Mr. Speaker, when you look at all that is being proposed here, against the backdrop of the overreach by the courts that we have had to deal with, overreach by United Kingdom that we've had to deal with, and now it seems as if there's an element within the civil service that wants to circumvent this Parliament, I really am concerned. It may seem, Mr. Speaker, like a minor change to the financial arrangements. But what, in my experience as a project manager, Mr. Speaker, it will do is assist in covering up poor project management. And I really wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that when this change is made. Mr. Speaker, this Parliament has a right to question and a right to know how the people's money is spent. We have a right as a Parliament, as the supreme authority in this country, to re-examine any appropriations and any spending that is carried out by the government. Mr. Speaker, I heard the Minister of Finance say that this would result in less bureaucracy. But I have to remind the Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, this is a legislature, and it is supreme in our democracy. And what this is doing is potentially allowing individuals to circumvent this parliamentary process and carry on spending the people's money with less accountability. This change is going to reduce transparency in our democracy. And it is going to introduce the potential for poor project management, poor financial management. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, guess who is accountable? Who is held accountable for all of that? It won't be those that did it. It will be the people in here. Ultimately, we bear the responsibility and the accountability. And we're going to be the ones that are going to be held to task for it. I don't know if anybody else is comfortable with that thought, but I certainly am not, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Parliament is ultimately responsible for how the people's money is spent, no matter how you look at it. That is how the people who put us here expect it to work. But you know, recently, Mr. Speaker, based on certain things that I've seen developing in this country, the incidents of overreach and circumventing and minimizing. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, could I have 1 second? As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, I've seen what I consider moves to minimize and diminish the role of this legislature. I'll refrain from saying Parliament because it's not actually called the Parliament just yet. I hope. That's no secret. But Mr. Speaker, I start to wonder sometimes if the people out there who consider this country to be packed with idiots, if they are also making the assumption that those people they refer to as idiots out there are electing a bunch of idiots in here. Because that is what it appears to me to be, that's what appears to be the case. That somebody would think that any legislator would willingly make a move in here today, agree to a change that is going to diminish our ability to do our jobs and to be responsible to the people who put us here. I certainly don't want any part of that. Mr. Speaker, this is totally undemocratic in what it sets out to achieve. We operate in a system of checks and balances. And when, I was going to say later on, Mr. Speaker, some on the other side haven't been on this side just yet. But if you stay here long enough, you will end up over here. Some have been here and should know from experience what I'm talking about. Now that they're over there, it seems okay to them. I guess they don't have an intention of coming back here. But from this perspective, this lens, this filter, when especially being in the opposition, and you have very limited opportunities to look at the government's performance and spending, and the few opportunities you do have are here in this honorable legislature. And now we're changing the law to reduce the opportunity to do that. Well, when the Premier gets up and debates, Mr. Speaker, he can explain to me how I'm wrong. But we can't have a conversation while I'm debating. Well, when you get up, you tell me how I'm wrong. I'm explaining how I'm right. You're not listening. You're interrupting me, you're not listening. So, Mr. Speaker, and I know the little tricks, to throw me off and stop me from, make me lose my train of thought. Oh, no, I know. You wouldn't do that. But it is a requirement for good governance, Mr. Speaker, for us to be able to review the spending. The money that we come here and appropriate, vote with the people's trust. We also have a right to review how that money is being spent so we can report back to the people that all is well with their money. But for the Minister of Finance to say that this is going to reduce the level of bureaucracy, in the face of what I've just explained, Mr. Speaker, in terms of transparency and this legislature and what the legislature is supposed to be doing, it is a bit of a self-defeating statement to say that. We are now acquiescing to those out there who think that this legislature is packed with a bunch of idiots. And I hope none of us believe that. Mr. Speaker, this is not how our parliamentary process is supposed to work. We have agreed to 2-year budgets to make things more efficient and for the added convenience. But it is not best practice, in my opinion. I have worked, Mr. Speaker, in the private sector, and I have been involved in managing projects, and there's never been an occasion when I could justify being given a budget for a project, not using that budget, and just continuing on in the following year to spend those monies without going back to my board of directors and getting approval and justifying why I was doing that. For all the reasons explained by the Leader of the Opposition not too long ago. Mr. Speaker, we are about to embark on a number of projects that are going to involve a lot of heavy spending. The Premier just made an announcement about the port. In his opinion, that will be moving forward. That certainly isn't shared over on this side. But we have talks about the airport. Georgetown revitalization, waste management. But these are all proposed projects. They haven't happened yet. So the Premier is saying that they just can't say they haven't done anything, but these are all inching along. Mr. Speaker, I certainly wouldn't want to be the minister responsible for any of those projects and not be in a position to go to cabinet and discuss why or why not certain funds that have been allocated have been spent or not spent. I wouldn't want to be in a position where I would come down to this legislature and someone in the opposition asks me a question about it and I can't answer or explain. So we have to be careful about cutting ourselves out of the loop, the decision-making loop, especially the honorable ministers, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we have to consider, and it's funny because as my colleague from Bordentown West said it, I had just written it on my pad and I showed it to the leader of the opposition, the tail wagging the dog. And that is the situation that we are caught up in now. We are the people elected to serve. We are the people elected to manage the people's money. We are the ones that are going to be held ultimately responsible for it. And now, what we're going to end up doing is relinquishing some of that authority, that responsibility given to us by the people who voted for us. Exactly. We want more from the UK. So, Mr. Speaker, I really can't support this change. If the government is going to go ahead and do it, they're going to do it without my support. I certainly hope that those who have not been on this side are listening and that they try to see this from the perspective of the opposition. Sometimes we put forward useful suggestions, and it's not just for politics' sake, it is because we see a major issue arising. And if you listen to our advice, if you listen to what we are proposing, you're going to save yourself some heartache later on. Because you know that there are less numbers over here. The individuals on this side of this honorable house have to be sharp, have to be paying attention, and we don't miss very much. And you will be embarrassed by it. And none of us wants that. None of us wants to be embarrassed by something someone else has done, but we are ultimately responsible for. So avoid it altogether, Mr. Speaker. That's all I'm saying. Sorry. So, Mr. Speaker, I didn't plan to speak very long. Matter of fact, I didn't plan to speak until some of this started to unfold. But I quickly made some notes because I thought it would be best that, for emphasis, the government heard from just about all the members of the opposition. I know the member from Prospect was questioning why so many of us are speaking on this. It's for emphasis, Mr. Speaker, because it's so crucially important, critically important, that the government listens to this advice. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No rest for the weary. Mr. Speaker, amidst doing a range of other things, I listened with one ear while I was out of the chamber, and with both since I've been back in, and I have really struggled to understand what the issue is that is being raised by the members of the opposition who have spoken. I don't understand where there is any loss of transparency as a result of this small but important change that is being proposed with respect to Section 9 of the Public Management and Finance Bill. Nor do I believe that the members who have spoken truly understand how the business of government actually works, particularly with respect to projects, capital projects, which extend beyond one calendar year or one financial year, as the case may be. I have heard a lot of the age-old rhetoric about this House, this Parliament being responsible ultimately for the people's money. It's true. It's trite. But the system of government which we has gives the power of executive decision-making to the Cabinet. And the Cabinet is accountable to the House. The Constitution says so. And the House exercises its scrutiny of government spend in two ways. One through the process called Finance Committee, the other through the work of the Public Accounts Committee, as well as the watchdog of the Office of the Auditor General. There is no lack of scrutiny of what the government does with respect to finances. Mr. Speaker, the history of the change to a multi-year budget was the result of the experience which myself and the then Minister of Finance, Marco Archer, had when we visited the Crown Dependency of Jersey, the states of Jersey, where they have one budget for an entire term. Mr. Speaker, we discovered that it was requiring the civil service to spend 9 months of the year engaged in one aspect or other of the budget process. Almost as soon as you deliver one budget and it comes into effect, you start the budgeting process for the next year again. The leader of the opposition is fond of talking about effectiveness and efficiency. I'm sure he will agree with me that spending 3/4 of the year, financial year, engaged in the budgeting process delivers neither effectiveness or efficiency. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we took the view that we wouldn't go to a full-term budget because, to start with, the states of Jersey budget term is only 3 years, not 4. And secondly, we felt it was important that at least twice during the term, the entire House, through Finance Committee, had the opportunity to scrutinize every aspect of the budget which the government, whoever the government happened to be, was proposing. Of course, there are interim opportunities for Finance Committee to scrutinize various aspects of the budget and to ask a range of questions. We've had, I think, at least 2 meetings of Finance Committee already this year. There'll be probably at least one more before we go into the next budget cycle. But the reason why this change is proposed, Mr. Speaker, has nothing to do with or little, I should say, to do with the concerns raised by the leader of the opposition and the member for the deputy leader of the opposition. To be fair, I wasn't able to focus enough in my other meeting on what the member from Bontown West said, so I can't really address much of what he said. But I gather it was along the same theme, with embellishments as a result of his accounting expertise. No, embellishments, the use of the word embellishments was not meant to be facetious. Look up its meaning. Mr. Speaker, when government seeks to engage in a major project, and these days there are many major projects that extend beyond one calendar or financial year. Indeed, the cruise and cargo port project, which I spoke about this evening, we are in the 7th year and 3 administrations. So, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition is saying correctly that you budget for each year. Of course you do. But he is still stuck in the old paradigm that a budget cycle is 1 year. A budget cycle now is 2 years. So when Finance Committee approves the budget, it has approved expenditure for 2 years. The problem was, Mr. Speaker, that the requisite change to the language of the relevant subsection did not occur to reflect the intention of the House when it passed the amendment to the Public Management and Finance Law in the first place, that we would move to 2-year budget cycles. That was the clear intention of the legislation. That is the decision that Finance Committee took when it approved the last budget. It approved a budget for a 2-year budget cycle. The problem was, and is to this moment, that philosophy was not reflected in the relevant subsection. Richard, you're not carrying anything over, Mr. Speaker, to address the sotto voce comments of the member from Newlands. He also appears to be stuck in the paradigm that a budget cycle is 1 year. It is not. A budget cycle is 2 years under this current legislation. The mechanics, no, we didn't approve it 1 year at a time. There is no reference back to Finance Committee for the current budget unless there are going to be increases in it, which is when we come down here. Finance Committee approved 2 years of expenditure. If you let's change 11.6. Let's change that. It is a 2-year budget cycle. What was not adjusted were the mechanics with respect to it. So that as the law currently stands, the approval to spend expire for a project, even if the money has been approved and allocated, if you don't spend all of the allocated money within the course of for that year, in the course of that year, it is not automatically carried forward for the project. Further approval is required. So, we have had a number of instances, and that is what has brought this here, with projects that were on the way when the 31st of December 2018 came to an end. And the money which had been allocated for that project and approved, the authority to spend that money fell away on New Year's Eve. That is not the intention. If this House and Finance Committee approves the expenditure for the budget cycle, money ought not to fall away. The authority to spend money ought not to fall away simply because you reach the 31st of December. What we cannot do is to carry money forward from one budget cycle to another without the approval of Finance Committee. So we need to all start thinking in terms of budget cycles rather than in terms of financial years. And that is what this change, all this change is intended to do. And let me read it, Mr. Speaker, so that we all appreciate its effect. So, Mr. Speaker, Section 9(5) of the Public Management and Finance Law 2018 revision reads, except to the extent otherwise provided by a law, an appropriation lapses at the end of the financial year to which the law by which the appropriation is granted relates. The proposal is to amend Section 9(5) by deleting the words financial year and substituting the words budget period, so that when amended, the subsection will read, except to the extent otherwise provided by law, an appropriation lapses at the end of the budget period to which the law by which the appropriation is granted relates. And right. So, Mr. Speaker, this is no radical or alarming proposition. This is sheer common sense. It ought to have been this way from the outset, and we would not have had to deal with the problems with which this process has been fraught over the course of the last few months. Mr. Speaker, I am most grateful for the concern being expressed by the Leader of the Opposition that I am struggling. But I promise him I am only struggling to stay on my feet because I'm so weary. But I am not struggling with this issue at all. The Minister of Finance and I and the other ministers have been grappling with how we keep projects going because the authority to spend money goes away. So we have to go and exercise executive authority to appropriate under Section 11(5) or Section, and then come and bring it back down here again, when in the first instance, Finance Committee has already approved the entire budget period. See, Mr. Speaker, I sat over there for far too long and intend never to do so again. But, but when you sit over here for a while too, you tend to understand the importance of practical solutions to real problems. No hypothetical stuff over on this side. We live in the real hard knocks world of having to deliver on projects, having to account for what we do. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I said, they may curse me as they have done in the past and my administration for things we do. But what they will not honestly be able to do is to say what has been said about some in the past is they didn't do nothing while they were there. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope that I have been able to address the concerns, not the Speaker. Not the Speaker.
No, the Speaker was very, very practical.
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about some, or at least one, not some, because the member from Savannah did 3 terms in cabinet. He understand. That way he not saying nothing. I'm talking about those who were on the government bench and volunteered to go in the opposition so they wouldn't have to deal with the accountability that I am talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Mr. Speaker, I hope that I have been able to address the concerns raised by the honorable members of the opposition regarding this matter, and that they now will understand and appreciate that rather than being a cause for alarm, the government is working to provide practical solutions to real problems.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Honorable Minister of Finance, closing the debate.
Mr. Speaker, I just ask you to give me a few minutes to consult with my chief officer. Can I beg for a quick 5 and a short 10? Mr. Speaker, may I proceed?
You ready?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir,
Think
you
so.
have the floor.
What's that?
You have the floor.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I want to record my thanks to everyone who has debated this bill, especially to members of the opposition, who clearly had read the bill and seemed to understand what we were trying to accomplish, although I want also to acknowledge and thank them too, particularly those of them that spoke, and for the vote of confidence in the staff of my ministry, in particular the financial secretary and the rest of the team that work with me from within here. Mr. Speaker, what we are trying to accomplish by this bill is not unheard of. It is not uncommon. As the Premier rightfully pointed out to members of this House in his contribution, within the United Kingdom and its overseas territories, there are some countries, and there are others as well, that have multi-year budgeting. We look quite closely at what was taking place in Jersey, where it has been employed quite successfully, and what we are proposing exactly what they do. Their electoral term lasts 3 years, and when at the beginning of it, a budget is set for that 3-year term, and they're allowed to spend it as throughout the 3 years. There's no need for them to go back to their legislature at any time during that 3-year period to seek reappropriation of funds that they had previously approved. And so this is really what we are trying to accomplish. The Premier, he spoke quite eloquently and I think set the right tone of what it is that we are trying to accomplish, and that this is not some way to try and reduce transparency and to not be accountable to the people. And I acknowledge those things do happen. But it is not, as the opposition have alluded to, that it's always a lack of competence or some other reason with regard to the good people in the civil service. There are a myriad of reasons, Mr. Speaker, why a project which might be approved in 1 year but doesn't get finished or possibly even started, but needs to be dealt with in the following year. And all we are trying to do is say that if you approved it once for a budget period, there is no need for us, or should be no need for a government to have to come back within that budget period to seek appropriations already appropriated and approved. Therein is one of the main increases and reductions of increases in efficiency without having to spend time to look at things a second time. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, there is absolutely nothing that changes in terms of the opposition's ability to scrutinize, approve, or deal with any appropriation that comes before the House. Mr. Speaker, they still have the opportunity to ask parliamentary questions from time to time with regard to any financial matter that they wish to do. They also have the quarterly financial reports that are tabled in this House on time. And for the first time since the establishment of the Public Management and Finance Law, they are being tabled in accordance with the requirements of these laws. These financial reports give all MLAs and anyone who looks at them a lot of information and detail about how government's funds are being spent. And they can look and see it there with regard to any capital project that is approved, what's been appropriated, and what has been spent. So the information is there, and they have every opportunity to make themselves familiar with what's going on and the ability to ask parliamentary questions. And you also have the annual financial reports. That doesn't change. Government still has to produce those reports and annual consolidated financial statements and make them available to all MLAs. So nothing, and their ability to scrutinize has been and approve and to be made aware of what's happening within the government is being curtailed in any way whatsoever by this amendment. Every one of these options are available to them at any point during the 2-year budget period. Mr. Speaker, I recall that when the member for Bodden Town West spoke, he suggested that supplementary appropriations would cease. Nothing could be further from the truth. They won't cease. Any supplementary spending that this government wishes to undertake, it must come down here and seek
Mr. Speaker, point of order. So I didn't say that they would actually cease. I said it would be limited in terms of coming to the House because of the time period. I didn't say they would cease.
Honorable Minister.
I stand corrected. But I would say what the bill does do is that it would seek to eliminate us having to come down here and seek appropriations for for items that have been appropriated during the budget period. We only need one appropriation and one opportunity. Not poor project management at all, sir. I don't care. One moment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the other item I wanted to mention is that within the cabinet itself, our budgets and our spending undergo monthly scrutiny, because I do take papers to the cabinet every month in reporting on government's financial statements. And so, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate and say again that this thing is not as life-changing as the... I don't distract you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I can just wrap up the debate right here now and leave it. I think I have said enough, we have explained enough, and we will take it to the next stage. Thank you, sir.
Question is that the Public Management and Finance Amendment Bill 2019 be given a second reading. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against?
No.
No.
Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, division, please.
Madam Clerk, division.
Because you will be led astray, old boy. You might learn how to get into government and stay there. You didn't learn how to do that. Someone else did that for you.
Honorable Alden McLaughlin.
Aye.
Honorable Moses Kirkconnell. Honorable Juliana O'Connor Connolly.
Aye.
Honorable Dwayne Seymour.
Aye.
Honorable Roy McTaggart.
Aye.
Honorable Joseph Hugh. Honorable Tara Rivers. Honorable Barney Bush. Captain Eugene Ebanks.
Aye.
Ms. Barbara Connolly.
Aye.
Mr. David White.
Aye.
Mr. Austin Harris.
Aye.
Honorable Arden McLean.
No.
Mr. Alvis Akou.
No.
Mr. Kenneth Bryan. Mr. Anthony Eden.
No.
Mr. Ezra Miller. Mr. Christopher Saunders.
No.
Results of the division: 10 ayes, 4 noes. The bill has been given a second reading.
The Public Service Pension Amendment Bill 2019.
The Honorable, the Acting Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Public Service Pensions Amendment Bill 2019.
The bill has been duly moved. Is the honourable member speaking there too?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you. I rise to present the bill on behalf of the government. The Public Service Pensions Amendment Bill 2019 seeks to update the Public Service Pensions Law 2017 revision. Mr. Speaker, the changes which are proposed will improve the pensions being administered by the Public Service Pensions Board, the PSPB, and specifically, the updates discussed affects close to 10,000 plan members, with over 1,800 of these individuals being pensioners. Specifically, the following are the main highlights to the improvements that impact plan members of the Public Service Pensions Plan. The first main focus relates to disability benefits. The update is a significant improvement as the law is being amended in clauses 9 and 11 to extend benefits to eligible deferred vested plan members from the defined benefit and defined contribution plans, respectively. As a result of these changes, a former public servant may access their pension benefits early due to being certified as permanently disabled by the chief medical officer after that public servant leaves employment. Currently, a deferred vested plan member who is disabled still has to be eligible for retirement in order to start receiving pension payments. It is important to note this change, Mr. Speaker, is that the PSPB is going to proactively contact applicable plan members who are waiting this update to the law so that they can start the application process. This provision is in place where individual is in active employment, but regrettably the law did not previously have a provision that would allow for early access of a pension benefit where a deferred vested member, someone who no longer works for government but has their money within our pension plan, subsequently becomes disabled. So we're very happy to be able to move this amendment and to make provisions for that to happen in a person being a deferred vested member. Mr. Speaker, the second main update relates to the cash-out provision for non-Caymanians and is found in Clause 8, which amends Section 26 of the substantive law. In moving these provisions, we were very mindful of Section 110 of the Constitution, which does protect the pension benefits for public officers. I must stress that the cash-out provision is being preserved but modified. For existing employees who qualify, the only modification to this provision is that the cash-out timeline is now moving to a total of 3 months, including 2 months to allow both the applicant and the PSPB to confirm non-residency, and maintaining the original 1-month processing time frame. Mr. Speaker, the cash-out timeline is being slightly modified in order to facilitate proper due diligence to ensure that the non-Caymanian applicant is no longer actually residing in the Cayman Islands, to allow the PSPB the necessary administrative timing to facilitate cash flow requirements and to prevent disruptions to our investments, and to discourage any so-called revolving door approach for cashing out pensions for persons who are ultimately returning shortly to resume employment and residency. It is important to stress that our current plan members will be subject to only this modest 2-month extension of the processing period. For plan members who join the Public Service Pension Plan after January 1st, 2020, these future plan members who request a cash out will be subject to a 2-year waiting period of not working and residing in the Cayman Islands. This is a longer period, but it only impacts individuals becoming employed in 2020 or later. And it still preserves a cash out option for these individuals as well. This amendment is moved in accordance with international best practice, which shuns the concept that pensions are a short-term savings solution. I hasten to add that this is a balanced approach, and it still provides relative advantages to other schemes which totally ban cash-out arrangements. Mr. Speaker, the third main update relates to the credited rate of return, which is a defined term under Section 2. Presently, at the end of each year, the Public Service Pensions Board determines the rate at which interest is credited on every plan member's account. The law is being updated in Clause 2 so that the credited rate of return is calculated on a quarterly basis instead of annually. This means that account balances will now be credited on a quarterly basis as well. By moving to a quarterly update instead of an annual one, it ensures that plan member accounts will be updated more regularly and allows an even better approach to actual returns being smoothed to address the effects of market volatility. Clause 2 provides further definition changes to modernize and clarify the terms used in the law. Mr. Speaker, Clause 13 of the bill also brings forward revisions to the actual composition of the Board of Directors that oversees the Public Service Pensions Board. The law now reflects the correct titles, positions, and roles required to undertake the governance, investments, and pension administration performed by the PSPB. One new development proposed in the bill is the inclusion of a new board director that will be an active defined contribution plan member in acknowledgement of the fact that the vast majority of participants are now in a defined contribution plan. The PSBB is presently working through the parameters of how to appropriately recruit the director. When this new role is filled, it will ensure that the largest group of plan members are represented by one of their own, and the nominated board member will join a well-rounded group of experts and appointees designed to best represent the interest of the entire membership. Mr. Speaker, these are the main focal points, and as noted in the bill, there are some other minor amendments being put forward to ensure the law is accurate and that it has correct language to best represent the plan membership. I want to note that the bill put forward was prepared by the Public Service Pensions Board with careful consideration to provide greater clarity and fairness between the plan membership categories and our membership work towards their retirement. Mr. Speaker, beyond these updates and improvements, it is critical to remember that with the support from this government, the PSPB is steadily addressing the past service liability, as the Public Service Pensions Plan was started without a funding model in place. With this bill, the PSPB will be poised to enhance its operational and governance framework and protect and grow the financial future for its members. As assets under the PSPB's administration are expected to reach US $1 billion in the next 2 years, it is important that the PSPB introduces updates such as these being presented. This leads me to another important provision, Mr. Speaker, Clause 14 of the bill, which seeks to extend the range of investments available to allow adequate flexibility of the investment strategy. This is crucial to preserve wealth in a volatile market. Also, the PSBB must continue to explore efforts to better support and serve all the public servants, members of the judiciary, and honorable parliamentarians past and present. With that, I have been excited to see the PSBB have their focus on things such as the recent 25th anniversary celebration and pensioner appreciation events, the opening of a Cayman Brac office, and now they are presently exploring new online and improved member services functions. The bill presented today, along with the hard work and dedication of those administering these pensions, demonstrates the commitment to success in securing financial futures of all of our public servants. I would like to say as well, Mr. Speaker, that I would like to advise that we intend to bring committee stage amendments with respect to clauses 2, 3, and 13, and subject to that proviso, I commend this bill for the support of this honorable House.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Would the Honorable Acting Deputy Governor wish to close?
Mr. Speaker, I would just like to ask to thank the honorable members for their tacit support of the bill. Thank you.
Question is that a bill shortly entitled the Public Service Pensions Amendment Bill 2019 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The Public Lands Amendment Bill 2019.
The Honorable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of the Public Lands Amendment Bill 2019.
The bill has been duly moved. Is the Honorable Minister speaking thereto?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to amend the Public Lands Law 2017, and in particular, Clause 1, as usual, will provide the short title for the said proposed legislation. Clause 2 provides that the words Caymanian and permanent resident are to be given the meaning assigned to them in Immigration Transition Law 2018, and I can indicate, Mr. Speaker, that the Honourable Member from Northside and the government has had discussion as it relates to this, and I will leave that for him in committee stage but we can indicate that the government will be accepting his proposal as it relates to that clause. Clause 3 provides that the word chairman will be changed to the word chairperson throughout the law, providing for more gender-neutral usage of the word. Clause 4 provides for a change in the composition and appointments of the membership of the Public Lands Commission to allow members of the Commission who are not civil servants to be appointed chairperson and deputy chairperson. Clause 5 provides that the deputy chairperson shall, in the absence of the chairperson, be the acting chairperson at the meeting, and in the absence of both the chairperson and the deputy chairperson, the members present at the said meeting may elect another member to be the acting chairperson at that meeting. Mr. Speaker, also we see that the proposed amendment to Section 6, as it relates to the membership of the said commission, we were purporting to have the commission consist of 5 members from the public. And again, I can indicate that and the committee stage member from Northside will be making a certain proposal, which the government, through discussion, will be gladly to accept. And Mr. Speaker, we'll also seek that these amendments, we'll also wish to say that these amendments will help in the operation of the Public Lands Commission, as currently the Director of Lands and Survey is chairman, and in the vein of best practice, we thought that it would be best to make these amendments to allow a person from the private sector to be the chairperson and the deputy chairperson, while the director would still be a member of the Public Lands Commission. So hence these short amendments I am happy to recommend to honourable members today.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Call now on the minister to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to thank all members for their tacit support in regards of these proposed amendments, to thank the members of staff and the legal department for the crucial role which they've played today.
Question is that a bill shortly entitled the Public Lands Amendment Bill 2019 be given a second reading. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The bill has been given a second reading. The House will move to committee, but upon going into committee, we will suspend proceedings until 6:30.